The Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Today, friends, we have another exciting guest on this podcast, like we always do. Her name is Lura Forcum, and she's going to talk to us about her organization, about political independence. So welcome to the podcast, Lura.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
We're glad to have you. If you could get started by you kindly giving us an introduction to yourself, a brief biographical sketch.
Okay. So my name is Lura Forcum, and I'm the president of the Independence Center. And we have an audience of about 250,000 people who feel like neither side is right for them. They're like nonpartisan politically. And we are basically trying to build a political home for people who don't feel like they are primarily a Democrat or a Republican. And so we are a nonprofit organization. We're a C3, which means our mission is mostly educational. We have a weekly newsletter where we try to stay in contact with this community. But what we would like to do over time is make this into a real live organization where people meet up with each other at events across the country and just kind of create a larger movement of people who are politically independent. And what I mean by that is that they are engaged in politics, but not as primarily a Democrat or a Republican.
Okay, great. So when did this organization start?
We are about a year old, so we are very new, and we're just building our organization now.
Oh my, you already have 250,000 people?
Yes.
Oh my.
There's so much appetite, I find, when I talk to people for a different type of politics. And I think one of the dangers of having these really polarized, hyper-partisan two-party system is that people who think politics can be more collaborative and more constructive just don't want to participate when it's hyper-partisan, right? They're like,
sure.
This is miserable. I don't want to feel like I can't talk to people about politics. I don't want to feel like people are going to stop talking to me because of a political conversation, and they drop out of political participation because they're like, well, this is miserable and it has nothing to do with me anyway. But like, we really need those people in politics. And I don't mean in politics as elected officials. We need them participating as voters. And so trying to offer them something different seems really appealing. This is the only job I've ever had where when I tell people what I do for a living, I can't tell you how often people are like, that's amazing. How can I help? Like, I love that you're doing this. Can I do something to help you? I get that all the time. And that to me is like, it's like, okay, I think we're on the right track because people are really excited about this.
Yes. Are you one of the founders of the organization?
No, I'm not a founder. I've met a group of people who work in this organization about a year ago. And so as it was getting off the ground, we were talking because I had the same reaction when I heard about what they were working on. I had the same reaction that everybody else has, which is like, this is amazing. How can I help? So I started talking to Adam Brandon, who's one of the founders, and over time, as we talked about like how I could help, what my role could be, it made a lot of sense for me to serve the organization as the president. And so that's how I got here now. But I can't really take credit for the original idea. We have a group of people working together who have pretty different backgrounds. And I think that's one of the great things about our organization is that we don't overlap very much in what our skills are. So I'm a consumer psychologist, but Adam's experience is in grassroots political organizing, and we have folks who are in the polling world. We have folks in the more consumer marketing AI world. So we're just kind of a bunch of people who really love politics, but not the way most people say they love politics, where they want their side to win. We love politics in the sense that, like, we want this system to work.
Okay, wow. Yeah, that sounds like you see politics as a vehicle for improving people's lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I think good public policy makes people's lives better. And I think bad public policy can be really well intentioned and also make people's lives worse.
Oh, sure.
And so, I don't think that we get good public policy through our current system, which is just like winner take all, right?
Oh,
Like
yes.
one side wins, one side puts the policy into place, and then when they're out of power, the other side is gonna undo it, right? Like this is like a game of ping pong, except it's our public policy, and it's unpredictable, it's not good policy. There's all kinds of issues with it.
Okay. So you don't like the winner take all system. There's a number of reforms that we talked about in this podcast and exist a lot. We talked about most of them, most of the major ones. So which ones do you think are the most impactful reforms?
So we support the work of open primaries because we feel like this is one of the sort of low-hanging fruit approaches that would just make a huge difference. It would increase political competition, right?
Okay.
And when I'm thinking about the work that our organization is trying to do, I think at the root what we're trying to do is create competition because we think that is what's going to make voters better off. You would be better off if you are able to get an elected official who's closer to your views, and where we have this two-party system where primaries are closed, that just protects the two existing parties from political competition because they don't have to appeal to anybody outside of their base. And if they can redraw electoral lines, then, right, like that makes it even harder for somebody who is not a member of their party to compete. And the problem with that is that it's disempowering voters. So I think
Okay.
open primaries is like a huge area that would have really far-reaching effects. I think it would reduce political polarization.
Yes. Yeah, I've heard that too. A lot of people say with open primaries, what it does is because they say the regular primaries, they cater to the extremes of the parties because the party,
Exactly.
people who go to the primaries are the most dedicated people, so they want the extreme version of their party.
Exactly. And they're so deeply entrenched in their party winning that, and that the other party is terrible, right? That it doesn't matter how effective or ineffective their own party is because they just don't care. And that's where you lose accountability, right? Because if I am a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat or a dyed-in-the-wool Republican, nothing is going to change my mind about my own party. And so they don't have to deliver on their promises. They don't have to make my life better through public policy. All they have to do is continue to be my party. And like this is really not good for representative democracy because we need that accountability element.
Yes, good point. So what does your polling tell us what does your polling tell us are the number of independent voters in the population? What percentage?
So it's actually not even our polling. I know that from the last election in 2024, exit polling, self-identified independents were 34% of the American voters who turned out. That is tied with 34% of Republicans and 32% of Democrats.
Oh my, even split.
Yeah, right, exactly. Even split between Republicans and independents. And, interestingly, in some of our polling, what we look at when we break it down by age or generation is that Gen Z and millennials are 52% self-reported independents.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to parse these numbers, and I think it's really interesting to look at sort of age effects. But Pew Center as well has found that independents now are the plurality, right? So they're bigger than either Democrats or Republicans.
Oh, good. So what do you think is contributing to this? Is that we were talking about that people are sick of the polarization, or are there other factors? What do you think is contributing to the rise of the independents?
That is a great question. I think there are actually a lot of different things all coming together. So if you're talking about younger voters, something that's really interesting about them is that they have grown up in a world of almost continuous marketing, and they're extremely skeptical about marketing, including political marketing. And
Okay.
so I think they're skeptical. I think they're deeply skeptical of both parties. And I think that's different than older generations. And, it's interesting because actually my background is in marketing. So I have a PhD in consumer psychology, and I was a marketing professor for 7 years at Clemson University. And something really interesting that marketing finds is every year people get less and less brand loyal. Like there are fewer people who are really brand loyal. And what I think about when I see those numbers like that is, maybe these are just not people who, as we're talking about younger Americans, maybe these are just not people who are going to go all in for a party. And it's kind of interesting. You may have noticed this too. I noticed in people my generation and younger, a lot of the time they're not looking at a single company, a single celebrity, a single politician as being all good or all bad. What you'll hear them say is like, well, I like some things about them, but not everything. I don't like these other things. Right? And so to me, what it sounds like is they are likely to have some things they identify with in multiple brands, in multiple, celebrities or politicians. And so they aren't going to be partisans in the same way that, for example, baby boomers are, because they just look at the world in a different way. So that's one of the things that makes me think like you're talking about something very different with especially the younger two generations, and that maybe we're just sort of headed in a direction where people are less partisan. I also would say I think younger generations are a lot more accustomed to be tolerant of people who are different than them. I don't think being deeply partisan is very tolerant, right? Because what it says is the more partisan you are, right? You're saying like your ideas are wrong because of where they come from. And so I think increasingly like young people have grown up in this world where we've told them, people don't have to be just like you in order to be good people. And other people can live their lives in a way that's right for them. And it doesn't mean you have to agree with it or do the same thing. And so I think that the idea of being deeply partisan just doesn't make sense to them, because they're like, well, yeah, sure, those people have a different letter after their name, but they're, what's the big deal? You're entitled to your opinion. And so I think that that's actually like a generational difference. Okay. And it's something that we're trying to do some more research on to understand, like, what are the traits, like the behaviors, the way of looking at the world, what are like the underlying characteristics of somebody who says, I'm an independent instead of a partisan.
Yes. Yeah. That makes me curious too. There seems to be that you could see, and some would describe independence as they'll all be different, so it'd be hard to group them together. Yet others would say that there could be common characteristics among independents.
Mm-hmm. Right. We've heard that too. We have some research that suggests that actually independence views are a lot more cohesive than members of either political party. And you can kind of see how that would be the case, because if you think about an issue like abortion, right, among Republicans, you have Republicans who would support an abortion ban, but you also have Republicans who would say we need a moderate policy on abortion. And you would also have, you would also have more like libertarian leaning Republicans who would say there should be no restriction at all. So like that's an issue where a single party can't describe all of the variation in people's policy beliefs. And, you know, you can find all kinds of issues where that's the case.
Okay. So interesting. So it's the opposite of what you might expect, that the independents are more alike than party loyalists.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you can kind of see how we got there, because think about how many policy issues where it just really seems like the position, the party's platform or plank is just the opposite of whatever the other guy says. Right? Like if you're talking about environmental policy, Democratic position is we should be looking at renewable resources. The climate matters. The environment matters, right? And the Republican position is no, it doesn't. There's nothing to see here. Right? And that is a recipe for an absolutely absurd policy conversation. Is just to have a partisan conversation where it's like either this is a problem / no, it's not. The answer is somewhere in the middle on most issues, right? Like the answer is not zero taxes. The answer is not zero immigration. The answer is not zero abortions. It's just not. It's something more complicated than that. And we're not going to get there in a winner-take-all system, because we're going to end up with one extreme or the other. And I think what most reasonable people would say is, I think we can come to an agreement. Let's talk about what that would look like.
So you synthesize the best ideas out there, you put them together to create something greater than there would be otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what voters expect politicians to do, and it's just been the polarization of the last 20 or 30 years where they have stopped doing that at the federal level. You know, in state politics, you can't run the state legislature with the same degree of polarization that you can in D.C. You have to solve the problems of the state, right? Like the state has to have a budget. It has to pay for Medicare, Medicaid. It has to get roads paved and hold elections and, you know, educate students. It has all these responsibilities, and so people have to come together and figure out how those things are going to get done.
Okay, sounds good. So we talked about earlier in the show that your organization is a 501c3, which you stated you described as an educational organization. It's not a 501c4, so you're not a lobbying organization. So what activities are you doing to spread this message? In addition to, like today, you're speaking on a podcast. How are you communicating and attracting these independent-minded voters? So
we do a lot of podcasts like this one where we're trying to reach people who are interested in our ideas, who see themselves as maybe like, oh, hey, I don't belong in either party, but I would like to belong somewhere. And so we're trying to create an organization where people feel heard and feel like they belong. So we do quite a bit of research. We do polling. We do focus groups. We do interviews, because one of the things that's really important to us is that we understand what is important to independent voters. So we're not trying to say, here are the answers. What we say is, you know, okay, independents are really concerned with affordability and inflation. So if you're concerned about that, how do particular policy reforms impact it? And that's how we try to participate in the conversation, not to say you really should support this or you really should oppose that. Just we're trying to say, you tell us what's important to you and we'll tell you how particular policy issues work. We can't advocate for or against specific bills or for or against specific candidates. So the work that we do in the C3 is really like trying to build a movement, because we think it's really important for people to feel like being a political independent is something they might want to do. And in order to have that feeling, like, you need to know other people, share your values, and have that same perspective, right? So it's really like trying to create a community. We send out a newsletter, and like I mentioned earlier, we're trying to start doing some in-person events where hopefully, you know, we'll start small, but it'll be some people getting some beers and saying like, hey, this is what's important to us.
Okay, great. So if our audience would like to work for your organization, or somebody out there would like to work for your organization, where's your organization, first of all? That's in Chicago, right?
No, actually, we are virtual, so we're nationwide.
Okay.
So if you're interested in learning more, or you want to get our newsletter or find out when we're going to have events, our website is www.independencecenter.org. And if you go to independencecenter.org/hello, that's a link to sign up for our newsletter. You can find our newsletter on the website and like dig around, but that's how you could get in touch with us so that you can learn more or get our weekly newsletter. And we're trying, a lot of the times, like I was saying, people will ask me like, how can we help? We're trying to figure out ways to make it easier for people to get involved, either with us or with other organizations working in this space. So actually like do things. And that's something we'll be rolling out in the coming months.
Okay, good. So what tips do you have for people who are in this space, who are independence-minded people, for their communication, for them to attract people to their efforts that are in parallel with what you're doing? So if they have another organization that they're running that's geared towards political independence as well, or if they're organizing political independence, what communication tips would you have for them?
Yeah, so a few things. One is like, feel free to reach out to us. If you reach out through our contact form and say what you're working on, somebody will follow up with you. So we'll absolutely make sure that we get in touch and connect on what we're, jointly working on. And another thing that I think is so important for the conversation about independence is how we define independence. So we're not saying, and here's what you have to believe, or here's what you have to do to count as an independent. We're not trying to say there's a litmus test, right? Like, if you say you're an independent, we believe you. And you don't have to vote third party. So I think that's another thing that maybe people feel is a stumbling block if they're like, well, I'm an independent and there just aren't independent candidates here. I think the most important part that independents play in improving our political system is when they are swing voting and when they're split ticket voting. Because what that does is it says to the parties, you don't just get my vote because the letter after my name, right? Like, you're going to have to earn my vote by doing the things that I said were important and doing the things that you said you would do. So when you swing vote, right, when all these people who voted like Trump this last time, Biden the time before that, Trump before that, and, maybe Obama, right? Like, people like that are actually helping to keep things accountable because they're saying, like, what have you done for me lately? And we need people saying that in politics, right? Like, we need people to say, you didn't just get my vote because of being red or blue. You're getting my vote because of what you're offering. So I think the swing voting is really important. And then the split ticket voting too. My home state is North Carolina. North Carolina routinely does something like go red for the president, maybe red for senator, and then the governor is a Democrat. In fact, like, that's been the case more years than not, I think, for the past 50 or so years. And so, like, this is a state where people split their tickets. And that is incredibly helpful for accountability as well. So we're not saying to be an independent, the only way you can participate is to be a third party voter, we're saying even split ticket voting, even swing voting is really helpful for accountability. And by all means, if there's a third party candidate that you support, you should absolutely have the right to do that.
Sure. That makes sense. Sometimes the third party people and independent people, what they'll do is, they've talked about this on the podcast, sometimes they don't want to vote for a third party candidate, an alternative party candidate for president, yet they're okay with doing that for a smaller race. So they might do the alternative party candidate for a smaller race, yet they're afraid of spoiling it for the bigger race, so they'll vote for whatever candidate they think is the lesser of two evils. So that's another way. So in addition to the option of voting for maybe one Republican here, a Democrat there, and maybe there's a candidate that's completely independent, then there's alternative parties, so that you can mix and match it any way you want.
Exactly. And even if you vote straight ticket for one party, we're still not going to say you're not one of us, you don't belong. I think of the people who are identifying themselves to us and joining our community as these are people who are not deeply partisan, and they're people who have questions about what is the best position, what is the best policy, what is the best candidate. And I think a lot of the times the parties are saying to people like, well, you're not welcome here if you have questions, or you're not welcome to ask your questions. And so we don't want to say that, we want you to have questions. We think that's what makes an engaged, informed citizenry. And I'm constantly amazed at the people I talk to from our audience, because they think really deeply about policy issues, and they care a lot about what makes government good for everybody, not just one side.
Okay. So you talked about how the independents, they have a higher number in the millennials and the Generation Ys, or whatever we call them. So
whatever we're calling them.
Yeah, how about diversity? Is it across different races and different socioeconomic classes, or is it something that's limited to a limited array of socioeconomic characteristics?
I'm afraid to try and recall from our polling about what our racial characteristics were. I think something that's really interesting is lately we've been seeing actually blue collar voters or blue collar workers are more likely to identify as independent, which I think is interesting, right? Because in recent years, people have said, Republicans have really grabbed a lot of these blue collar workers. They're the party of blue collar workers. And historically, that's been something that's been associated with Democrats. Yes. And now what we're seeing is increasingly they're identifying themselves as third party. As independents. So I think that's one of the statistics I can say confidently. I'm sorry, I don't have a good recollection of what our other demographic associations are. I do know there's some association between people who are more religious and more likely to say that they're independent, which I think is really interesting, but we haven't had a chance to really unpack that in the data.
Okay. So right now it's a correlation that you're trying to find the causation for with the religiosity and the political independence?
Yeah, it seems like there is a correlation there, and we definitely need to do some more research on how that's the case or why that's the case. And we're just kind of, constantly engaged in some type of research, just whether it's polling on issues, we were doing some polling prior to the election to understand what voters' preferences were on different races. We also do focus groups. So we just did a focus group about a month ago where we gathered a bunch of right-of-center independent voters and also left-of-center independent voters in two separate focus groups, and just kind of let them tell us, what's important to you, what are the things you're seeing right now that concern you about politics? What are the things that make you hopeful? So we have lots of different ways we do research. We also we use AI to look at some political subreddits where people are talking about politics and public policy. So we use AI to like scrape and summarize those so we can understand the political conversations like really large groups of Americans are having.
Okay, so that's an efficient way of getting that data of those the textual analysis of their conversations on Reddit.
Yeah, exactly. So we can see like what is important to them, what is the language they use to talk about politics or policy issues. I think there's this real tendency to, it's like there's a disconnect between people who are super engaged in policy or super engaged in actual politics and electoral stuff, right, where they're running campaigns, and normal people. And so it's really interesting if you look at the conversations and how people actually talk, you'll see these disconnects, right? So, you know, politicians might talk about we need to reform something, but normal people don't like the term reform.
They don't.
Right. No, they prefer the term modernization, and I'm not sure exactly why. I suspect it's because a lot of times when people say reform, what they mean is like, we should get rid of this. Right? And so what they would like to see is improvement, but not getting rid of the entire, like not scrapping the policy, but improving it. Another example is the conversation around entitlements. So Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare. When people look at the term entitlements, they mix it up with the normal usage, right? So if you say entitlement in a regular context, what you mean is somebody who thinks that they deserve something that they actually don't get, right? Or like that they actually don't deserve, right? Like that's a criticism. But in policy world, when you're talking about entitlements, what you mean is things that you deserve to get because you paid for them, right? Like that's the idea of Social Security. Yeah. And so it's really interesting to see how that breaks down, right? Because when politicians talk about entitlement, I think a lot of people hear that as a criticism.
Okay.
Right? Like they have the negative association. So I think there are actually lots of places where our language around policy just breaks down. We're talking past each other.
Yes. That's very insightful what you said. I and other people in the alternative party space, independent space, do have, from my experience, a tendency to want to use the term reform. They want to use it. Mm-hmm. That's one word I'm constantly thinking about. So you saying that makes me want to reconsider to use language that's going to resonate with people better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and how they actually talk themselves, right? I think that's also really important.
Yes, so the data that you have presented, like we're talking about this Reddit textual analysis, is that available on your website? Can we look at that and so we can gain insights and apply them?
We have tons of research and polling on our website. I don't know if we have the entitlement issue on there currently, but that's a great idea for us to add that so that we can show you what some of that, what that AI research is coming up with. We feel like we could put out reams and reams of information about research because we're a little nerdy in that regard, and we do research sort of out of habit. So we're trying to like edit ourselves and not be and not go on and on and on about the data. But it's super interesting. And I think that one of the reasons it's not as apparent to the parties what voters actually care about and how they look at issues is because they can't stop thinking in the two-party system, right? And like independents can, third-party voters can. And, this is where we think it's really important. If we look at like, what are we trying to accomplish? Well, if we can better explain to members of both parties and to the parties themselves what voters are looking for, that's one way of getting them to make policy that is better representing what independent voters want, right? Is just to provide the information, like, here's what these voters care about. Here are their concerns.
Sounds good, yeah. And then they can get in touch with, they can find ways to reach the voters better. So what are...
Yeah, exactly.
So from your experience, what are ways that the independent voters like to be engaged with the politicians? Do they like town hall settings? Do they like social media? How do they like to engage with politicians?
Oh, that's a great question, and I do not have any data that speaks to that. I would be super interested to know that, and that's something that I could add to like our long list of research questions and things to look into. But I will say, like, just from my background as somebody who studies human behavior, having an identity that's like, well, I'm just neither of these political parties is not going to create a strong sense of belonging, right? And that's why we're actually working at the Independent Center to create more of a movement, because no one wants to feel like they're defined by being not something else.
Oh, yes.
And we think for people to feel like they can go out and support independent candidates, right? Or buck the two-party approach to the world, the two-party view of the world, they need to feel like they're part of a group of people who feel the same way. That's very much part of human nature, right? Is to like have this need to belong. And that's why, that's really what our emphasis is on, is like, how do we make people feel like they belong?
Oh, great. And so then you can figure out the best ways to attract them to your movement. It sounds like you're not having trouble doing that, so it sounds like you're doing it right.
Right, exactly. We're trying.
Yeah, that's good. It reminds me of a lot of psychology and self-help material will tell you that you want to not define yourselves as what you're against, but what you're for.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that's another thing that's come out in our research that I think is really interesting. And I wonder why the two parties haven't figured this out. But when we poll people, they want to see, and not just independents, although certainly independents are high on this, members of both parties want to see politics being collaborative and across the aisle, right? Like, they don't want to see parties locked in trench warfare. They want to see them working together, and they want to see bipartisan governing. And, this is such a strong preference, and yet in Washington you see two parties where, like, you can't be seen talking to somebody of the opposite party.
Yeah.
And like, this is just totally divorced from how normal people live their lives, right? Like, if you think about it, within your family or in your community or at your workplace, you have to work with people and you have to agree with people and find ways to work together even when you disagree on things. And we're used to doing that. And that's how we all operate on a daily basis. Yet somehow when you go to Washington, D.C., it's like you've gone through the looking glass and we don't do that anymore. And so this is where I think it's really important. This is like one area where I think we can be helpful to the parties and saying, like, hey, you might not have known this, but it's really important to voters that you work across the aisle. Yes.
You raise a good point. I know a lot of people that are that way, that oftentimes they're describing people these days that are, they stick to their tribe. But a lot of people I know, I run this podcast, so I'm much in favor of alternative parties. Yet I have friends of Republican and Democrat friends. So yeah, it's definitely possible. And I don't think I'm the only one that's doing that. It sounds like I'm not. So yes, you raise a good point there.
Yeah, I think, if you're talking about what it is that makes America unique compared to other countries, I think one of the things that's really unique about our country is that we, for a long time, have been able to have people from different backgrounds, right? Like different religious groups, different races and ethnicities who live together harmoniously because we're accustomed to difference, right? Like it's the melting pot or the salad bowl, depending on what analogy you want to use, right? But what it is like this ability to connect with people even when we're different, and to say, like, we don't have to agree on everything in order to live together peacefully. And it's kind of like the only people who have decided that that's not the way we're going to operate is a few people in Washington. The rest of the country is still going around like just like you are, where you're like, yeah, I love third parties, but I also have good friends who are members of the Democratic or Republican Party, and that's important to me. That's
exactly.
normal life.
Yes, and
so maybe what we need to do is like rescue Washington.
Rescue Washington. Wow. Yeah, I think it also keeps us all accountable too, because if we're independent or alternative party people, we might also fall in the same trap that they're doing, that they're being hyper partisan, and we might be excessively hyper partisan in response. So then I remember I have a Republican friend, I have Democratic friends, and they're both tolerant of me. So I want to return the tolerance and be tolerant of them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I suspect that you like alternative parties because politics is really important to you. And, that's kind of how I look at it, is like, this work is important to me because it's the political system as a whole that I want to see being effective. It's not just like one side. But, I think it's not impossible to appreciate that there are other people who feel the same way, just they happen to think that that's accomplished through a different party than you.
Good point. Now, I heard you mention earlier in the podcast that the way you define independence is something that is self-identified. So if it's self-identified, how do they declare their independence? How do they perceive that as declaring? Is it in the states that have party registration, they're registering as an independent, or are there other ways that they're declaring their independence?
That's a great question. Yeah. So not every, and like part of the stumbling block, right, is that not every state has party identification through their voter registration process. So like I live in South Carolina and there's no party ID on your ballot. So, as far as we're concerned, if you're an independent, if you say you are, there are a number of organizations, including ours, where if you want to be connected to other people who feel the same way, we encourage you to get in touch and like sign up for our newsletter. It's not obligating to you to anything. It's not going to change your voter registration. It's just an opportunity to sort of be in community with like-minded people. And so we can kind of collectively, I think, start to figure out how we can participate in politics in a way that brings things back to a little bit more normal than where we currently are.
Sounds like a good plan. So earlier in the podcast, you mentioned your website, so where people could go to get connected with your organization. Would you mind mentioning that again so we can have people who might want to catch it again and get the information down?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we are www.independentcenter.org, and our website has resources if you're curious about how to register as an independent in your state, or, what primary laws are like in your state. We have lots of resources for independent voters. We have some policy resources. If you want to think through different policy issues from a nonpartisan angle. We also have our research and polling if you're curious about, how independents view different issues, or our focus group results, for example. Lots of different research, pieces of research are there. And you can also either get in contact with us or sign up for our newsletter. There are forms for both of those things on the website that you'll find if you look around. And if you'd like to reach out and talk to me or talk to one of the people from our organization, there's a form that says, I think it says get in touch. And there's also another place, a link where it says newsletter. So however you reach out to us, we will absolutely get back in touch with you if you are looking to connect and have a conversation.
Great. So do you require dues to belong to your organization, or how does that work?
No, we don't have dues. In the future, hopefully not too long from now, we're going to add a link if people would like to contribute financially. We would absolutely welcome the support, but the newsletter's free, and, you know, you're welcome to join us. No dues, no membership, none of that.
Okay, so if you're not getting through dues, I hope it's not a noisy question. If you're not getting paid through dues, are you getting paid through grants, or how's the organization funded?
Yeah, so we have one foundation grant currently, and we have some individual donors who have kind of given us like seed funding to get off the ground.
Okay.
And we're looking for, you know, other sources of support. Absolutely. We need to like broaden our base of financial support because it costs money to do this work, and we're competing against two parties that are extremely well funded.
Yeah.
And they don't seem to like competition. So, you know, we absolutely are going to have to raise money to continue this work. But people who are interested in participating in our organization, like, there's no cost to do that, and we hope you'll reach out because we'd love to include you.
Great. So thank you for coming on the podcast today and talking about your movement. It sounds like you got a good thing going.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I really appreciate you having me, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
Me too. Have a great day, and all the best with your organization.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.